8BitDo is a company that I think I can speak for the masses when saying that it got a lot of us excited in third-party controllers. Many of the products they've put out in the past couple of years have left many of us wanting to have their products in our homes. Today we're talking about a product that immediately caught my attention, the Ultimate 2C. However, I have to say it's not at all what I expected, and not all of it is good. Hi, I'm Clef, and you're watching gametechtalk. Now, this is a product I bought myself. They did not send that for review. Still, it wouldn't change a thing. So first we'll look at what is this controller made of, and later on in the video I'll have a comparison to other Ultimate products, because, and that kind of goes with the intro, a lot of what makes this controller actually surprised me. So let's talk a little more about it. Let me show you what came in the box. You'll have, of course, the controller, a 2.4 gigahertz dongle, a cable to charge that matches the color of the controller. This is a gift, so depending on the bundle that you buy, you might get this gift, you might get another one. Some of them comes with a little keychain. The box, of course, and then the manual. It is available both in wireless and wired version. The one difference being, of course, that one is only to be used wired, whereas this one can be used either with the supplied 2.4 gigahertz dongle or Bluetooth as well if you want. The face buttons are membrane. This is what you have here. Very nice sounding, kind of a stiff membrane, much like what you would expect from old school controllers, which is probably a staple of 8BitDo's controllers in general. They have very nice buttons. Now the sticks, of course, the sticks we have here is Hall effect, which not every Ultimate models have, but this one definitely does. But one thing also is you have those anti-friction rings to allow for easier glide motion, and you also have these metal rings as well to do exactly the same to allow you to glide a little easier. Here you have a tactile D-pad, so that's definitely one of the big changes. This is a tactile D-pad, muted. You have tactile function buttons. That is pretty much always the case. However, the layout did change a little bit. You have tactile clicky shoulder buttons. Same goes for the extra buttons, which have moved from the back to this layout to the top of the controller. And you have dampened Hall effect triggers as well. That makes up for the controller. You still have the 2.4 and Bluetooth switch in the back, USB-C at top for charging or wired usage, and you also have a pairing button right here. You don't have the pogo pins at the bottom for docking. This is the controller in a nutshell. A few other changes, and to my knowledge, the first controller from 8BitDo to support a 1000 hertz polling rate, and that's definitely one of the things, and we'll talk about performance later in this video, but that's definitely one of the things that is new to this product line, and arguably probably the biggest advantage. If you're not familiar with some of the things that makes this controller appealing, let me just touch base real quick on them. Hall effect basically uses a magnet rather than using potentiometers for the value of your sticks and your trigger. So anything that is axis value basically. Hall effect uses a magnet, which reduces risks of drift, and it also gives you usually a more precise kind of reading, sometimes too precise. Some people prefer ALPS, some people prefer Hall effect. I would say that if you're not like a super duper extremely competitive kind of person, you're probably gonna like the fact that these are very unlikely to drift. But if you play a lot of FPS shooters and you're used to something like an Xbox controller or PlayStation controller, a lot of people do find that the Hall effect sensitivity makes for sort of a jankiness experience, especially when dealing with camera movement. When it comes to the polling rate, basically most controllers on the market has a 125 hertz polling rate. We're starting to see 250 hertz, 500 hertz, and 1000 hertz. The highest the controller is, the more messages it transmits to the device that it's being used on. So a phone, a PC. Now there are things that can still happen like latency, input lag. Usually, most times, having a higher polling rate means that the communication happens faster. It usually gives you for a very pleasing kind of smoothness to your inputs. That's not to say that you cannot experience latency, but you have solutions like being wired or using a dongle to prevent having too much of it. The ergonomics is just not the best for me personally. I tend to prefer what 8BitDo did prior to the Ultimate, but look, I know for a fact, so don't throw me rocks in comments here. I understand all too well that I am in the minority here. A lot of people love the Ultimate controllers. I understand I'm the exception here. In terms of ergonomics and in terms of feel, the controller feels exactly like the Ultimate. When you hold it, it's just about the same. The one difference is, well, there's something about holding it that just makes you understand that it is a less expensive product, and we'll talk about the price by the end of it. It's not bad by any means. It's still on the upper tier of the third-party marketing controllers, but I do feel a difference between the 2C and the original Ultimate. Undoubtedly a difference in weight when it comes to the controller, but there's a lot more happening in terms of everything else. This one is rated as 1000 hertz pulling rate. Now, again, I'm not trying to insult anybody. I know a lot of people love 8BitDo. I have every controller, not every color scheme, but every different models that 8BitDo have put on market. So believe me, I love what they do. However, the fact remains that when it comes to performance, 8BitDo has traditionally been pretty much some of the worst. I want to take a second to just address the fact that we don't all want the exact same thing from a controller. If someone is after performance, you want to steer clear, generally speaking, from 8BitDo. If you are after ergonomics, style, features, then that's a different story altogether. But when it comes to input lag, when it comes to latency, when it comes to just all the things that a lot of controllers do amazingly well, 8BitDo, generally speaking, should simply not be part of that conversation. And I would say that it kind of applies here as well. Now, you might be thinking, what the heck are you talking about? It's 1000 hertz pulling rate. Yes, it is, but it does not reach 1000 hertz pulling rate, not in my testings. When it comes to benchmarking this controller wired, I was getting approximately 65 to 70% stability off of 1000 hertz pulling rate. Now, the thing is, for the most part, that should make it better than most controllers that are under. So 125, 250, 500, not so much, because we're extremely close to that number. But with that said, it's something to mention with 8BitDo controllers in general. The Bluetooth latency was never all that great. This one does not break out of the mold. When it comes to using the dongle, it also underperforms versus wired. That's to be expected. But it just brings you closer to not really being a true to form 1000 hertz pulling rate. And that is all the case here. So if you are looking for something that is better than what you've already experienced with the Ultimate controllers from 8BitDo, you will be getting exactly what you want. But if you're after something that is extremely competitive with the highest stick clarity and the highest input lag and latency, or I say highest, the best performance is what I'm trying to say, that controller is not it. Overall, it feels good. It's a good quality controller. Just manage your expectations if you're thinking of going into Call of Duty with this. To me, it's not the controller for that. If you're someone that plays Apex Legends with a controller, that's not the controller for it. It simply is not. When it comes to software, that's another thing. And you're starting to kind of get a feel of what my introduction was all about. This controller is called the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C. In my mind, because I compare it to the Ultimate, it is an upgrade. It moves forward. It brings the product line to new standards. And to some aspect it is, but to many others it isn't. This doesn't have any software support, at least for the time being. Will that change? I don't know. But if you are familiar with 8BitDo software, which I would be the first to scream to the masses that this is probably one of the absolute best aspects of any previous 8BitDo controllers, is that you have a phenomenal software solution that works on iOS, on Android, on Windows. When it comes to the 2C, you have no software support. So everything you do is out of the controller. And you do have some features, which I won't touch base on this video, but it does support turbo and it does support mapping your buttons, the L4 and R4 buttons. But when it comes to changing the dead zones of your sticks, when it comes to changing the dead zones of your triggers, you don't have any of that. Changing the layout, it does not support software like the other models from 8BitDo does. The other thing is, that doesn't work on the Switch. That doesn't work on iOS. It does work on Android. It does work on Windows. It doesn't spoof. So it follows the X input protocol. So usually if the game you're trying to play works with an Xbox controller, there's no reason that it shouldn't work. But because it is not spoofed, there are occasionally games that look for specific models and makes from manufacturers and brands, which could potentially affect the compatibility of this controller. If you go through Steam, because of Steam input, you should never really run into that issue. But if you're playing games outside of the Steam platform, you could potentially run into situations where this controller will not work. Ultimately, it is a good product for someone that loves the Ultimate and uses it on PC or Android. It's not expensive to buy this controller either. There's a lot of things that this controller does different. I find that it's a bit unfortunate, or at least that they should have a better way to differentiate the models. So for example, you have goalie kits, right? And you have the KK3 Pro, which I reviewed recently on the channel, and the KK3 Max. And it's, at least in my opinion, it's fairly clear that one is an upgrade to the other. Whereas with the Ultimate 2C, you would think, because of the name progression, the naming scheme, that it is an upgrade to the Ultimate, but it's not on every aspect. In fact, there are some aspects that, yes, you do upgrade. Pulling rate, Hall effect, to name pretty much what the upgrades are. But for a lot of other things, it's actually a step back. I'm sorry to say, if you bought an 8BitDo and you've raved about that controller, I will feel comfortable enough in saying that one of the reasons, if not the reason why you did, is because of the D-pad. I don't understand this decision. A lot of controllers have gone to tactile or mechanical or micro switch type D-pads. 8BitDo is renowned for their phenomenal membrane style D-pad. I don't understand why they took a step away from that. To me, that just does not make sense. As far as connectivity, it's not the best, but it's not the worst. And considering the price point, which is 30 USD or 45 Canadian dollars, it's pretty good for Hall effect sticks and triggers and 1000 hertz pulling rate. In fact, I would say that for that factor alone, it probably demolishes any other controller on the market. But 1000 hertz pulling rate can unfortunately be used as a buzzword. And I'm not trying to say, oh, it's 1000 pulling rate, it's guaranteed to be good. That is not the case. You know, it's not like every 1000 hertz pulling rate are made equal. Like if you were to compare this to a Sony DualSense Edge that does work at 1000 hertz pulling rate wired, you should not expect the same performance. If I was to compare this to a Vader 4 Pro, you should not expect the same performance, but it's also not the same price. So at $30, 30 US dollars, that's actually pretty good for 1000 hertz pulling rate, even if it does not perform anywhere near to the max capacity or to the best input lag measures. The last thing I want to do is to have a section that really specifically compares the original Ultimate to the Ultimate 2C, and at least maybe that way you can make an informed decision, because there are Ultimate models with Hall effect sticks and Hall effect triggers. So if that's what you're after, maybe that's where you want to go. And plus they have a lot of awesome color schemes. As we mentioned, face buttons pretty much feel identical. When it comes to the sticks, of course, this one that I have is ALPS, this one is Hall effect. But in terms of the tension and the feel, it's almost the same. The one big difference is the metal rings and the anti-friction rings that you don't have on some Ultimate models. I do think some of them have them, especially those special edition, but don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure. But if you look at the one I have, you don't have the metal rings, you don't have the anti-friction ring. The layout really doesn't have any impact other than the way it looks being slightly different. That's all there is to it. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention, this one does not have gyro. This one does. So if this is important for you, you do have it in the Ultimate model. This one has the dock support, whereas the 2C does not. The Ultimate has the back paddles in the back, whereas this one has the back paddles at the top. The Ultimate has the membrane D-pad, whereas this has a tactile D-pad. Of course, you have the dock itself, which comes with the Ultimate, it's not supported on the 2C. The Ultimate is more expensive, you know, that's a reality of it in terms of price. Of course, this one is going to cost you a little more. The Ultimate does not have a damping effect or dampening. I'm never sure which one it is, but it doesn't have that at the end of the actuation, whereas the 2C does. It's a lot more muted in terms of sound. Other than that, you have the notches to install a clip to use on your cell phone. If this is something you do not have it on the 2C. And then of course you have iOS and Switch support, as well as Android and PC on this one, and software support. Whereas here you do not have Switch, you do not have iOS, you do have Android and PC, no software support. And then when it comes to the layout, this one has an ABXY, whereas this one has BAYX. I think I mentioned it, but just in case, the Ultimate is going to be more expensive. Usually it's about, if I'm not mistaken, about 50 US. You do pay more, and that's the thing, you do get more. And so that brings me to the conclusion. Would I recommend this controller? I kind of talked about it during the video. I mean, if you're familiar with the Ultimate and this is what you want, but with better sticks and a better communication system with your computers and phones, well, Android phones, then I'd say yes, because again, 8BitDo should not rhyme with competitive sticks or competitive controllers, but that doesn't stop you from enjoying your games. I mean, I could easily play a Dark Souls-like with these controllers. In that regard, this one will be better. Personally, I think they took a step back when it comes to playing fighter games with the Ultimate 2C, which is a bit unfortunate because I do feel like it's one of those things that this controller is really popular for. Yeah, that D-pad is not cutting it for me. I don't like the feel as much. For the price that it is, if you end up playing casually your FPS games, is it going to be a terrible experience? No, actually, I think in my testings that it was pretty decent. Again, it's just not a controller that should be designed in your perspective of what you want to be competitive as the solution to go for. It just isn't. For everything else, I think it's beautifully priced. So would I recommend? Yes, as long as you are the right customer for that product. I think 8BitDo understood that. The naming scheme confuses me, but I'm not trying to say that their decisions to take a few steps back and a few steps forward is a bad one. I just wish it was a little more obvious onto consumers. That's really the only thing, because I do believe that some people will buy this just seeing 8BitDo thinking, oh, new model 8BitDo, I love these guys, let me buy it, and have expectations that will simply not be met. That's where I have a problem. I think that is unfair because you're kind of relying on your brand power, your brand proposition, to have people to have expectations that simply will not be met. So from where I come from and the market, the way that marketing has grown in my previous career, that's something that is just coasting the line of what would be false advertisement. And I'm not trying to say that this is what they're doing. Obviously, it's not. It kind of falls onto the consumer to really be aware of what they're purchasing. And some people will do that due diligence by watching videos like mine, but not everybody will. And it's for these customers that I feel it's a little, they're getting cheated a little bit, which is kind of meh. But for everything else, absolutely. What a great price proposition for Hall effect, for 1000 hertz pulling rate. You know what I mean? And yeah, that is pretty much it for me, guys. Hopefully that was a good video. Yeah, I think I'm going to end it on that one. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.